And, as I have been telling you that we as a linguist, we have to always explore other areas and avenues. As you recall, in the beginning of our internship program, during orientation program, I have explained you that languages, per se, if you only focus on languages, you are able to enter into a very focused domain, and that is called content writing, translation, blogging, etc. More of a scholarly pursuits, which was traditionally, considered a very, very promising area for it and promoting intellectualism. But with time, the forms of industry, the demands have changed. Dynamics of languages have changed. I recall we have, in our history, variety of translators or travelers coming. For example, we had Wen Sang, we had Fai Yan, Chinese travelers who had come to India, studied Hindi or that time Indian languages or Sanskrit, and mixed, Indian culture with Chinese culture, and brought in variety of, new things from China to India. Similarly, they took lots of new things from India to China. And even at that phase of time, a language expert, like these Wen Sang and Fai Yan, etc., they were given good importance in society. Similarly, we had a traveler like Ibn Battuta, who has taken our history to West through Africa and Arab world. Also during medieval period, or even during period of Kalidas, or during period of, Kabir, or during period of, let's say, medieval period like Mughal period, we had scholars from Farsi, we had scholars from Arabic, we had scholars from Sanskrit, and they used to have debate or shastrarth, we say, So transformation of knowledge used to take place from one corner to another. And also practically, if you look at Indian history or Indian culture or Indian ethos, every 4 kilometers there is a change in tone. And it is on record, that India has more than 1600 dialects. And all these identified dialects are grouped into 234, classified languages. And there are some divisions and broadly. So, you can understand the kind of diversity India has. That means India is a multilingual country. And if you look around yourself, including me or Dr. Sharma or Prachi or anyone, your friend, we are at least bilingual or trilingual. If we are from village background, we talk in our village language to each other. We go to college, we talk in Hindi or in that particular region. For example, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, Malayalam. This is the culture. And if we are lucky, we also have knowledge of Sanskrit in the classroom. We also get into English medium school. So 3-4 languages are, natural. So that means India is translating country. Now there is another dimension of our, languages, which perhaps our expert, Dr. Jagdish Sharma, who is professor at IGNOU, a pioneer for, translation studies in India, taught variety of courses and introduced rather variety of courses. And he will also agree, and maybe he will explain later, that, we as a translator or language person, there is always, a difference of concept between Indian concept of translating and between European or American concept of translating. In India, we had a culture of, transforming knowledge from one generation to another generation through oral traditions, right? And because of this oral tradition, Rishi Munis and all, they used to transfer knowledge from one generation to another through a language in which they used to speak. But language is never static. There is always a dynamism there, with change and a space, the language changes. Similarly, a mind, human mind is never static. When you receive something from a person, you always add something to it, right? And when you transfer it to somebody, again you enrich it, or many times there is a loss. So the knowledge transformation from one generation to another generation, from one language to another language, has been taking place in Indian context, through oral traditions. And therefore, we have a concept in India called Anuvad. We have a concept in India called Rupantar. We have a concept in India called Bhasantar. We have a concept in India called transcreation. They are not purely translation per se, if we talk from European perspective. Now what happens? In all these perspectives, when Britishers came to India, they needed someone, to do their basic administrative work from one language to another. And that was English. So they introduced English in 1835 under Macaulay's program. And the idea was to create a kind of administrative setup so that they don't have to pay high to Britishers who were here. Now I'm telling you about translation, from a very conceptual point of view. There is a historian, there is a writer called Nilanjana. If you read her book, she has introduced a concept called interpolation of history. So how this interpolation has taken place in Indian context? The interpolation of history has taken place in Indian context, through a concept called anthropology, right? So when Britishers came to India, they had in their mind to first learn the Indian history, Indian ethos, Indian literature, Indian legal system, economic system, political system, etc. So they introduced a concept called Sanskrit studies or Oriental college, in Calcutta, also in London. So they started learning the Indian language, Hindi or Sanskrit. They also learned how to translate classic books like Sakuntala. They also learned how to translate, books like Manu Smriti. They also learned how to translate some Shastra, Shastras that we say, or Smritis that we say. So all these things they were doing, before they introduced this English language in India. The idea was to study the culture of the country whom they are in the process of colonizing, and develop their economic, political, as well as cultural strategy to dominate. So they introduced a concept called English, and parallelly they also introduced, a scientific temper that is called anthropology, and promoted anthropology as a system of scientific reasoning, studying society, studying culture, etc. And those who study this and produce certain facts and results and analysis, it is based on certain rationale, certain facts. So those who are anthropologists, they are not the writers, they are not the poets, but they do translate, a culture from their own perspective to another culture. For example, what anthropologists do, they come to a culture, they observe people, they observe society, they observe, language, they observe customs, habits, and they write in their own language. So if a Britisher has come to India, he is there as an observer, he or she writes about Indian culture or Indian language, Indian ethos, India's values, etc. While writing, they transfer, the culture or the information about the society in English. But as I had told you before, a human being cannot be always, very, very critical and non-partial. So the concept of habitus that we have discussed before comes into picture. His ideology, his orientation, his thought process, which is purely Eurocentric, which is purely British, and those are always, there with some preconceived notions. So if something which is very rich about India, they are bound to diminish the value of that and present to their own culture in a negative light. So Indian history, rich history, Indian administrative system, in which both Muslims and Hindus and other sects have lived happily till Britishers came to India. They were all destroyed and presented to the Western world as if it was purely a kind of barbaric in nature. So, all this thing was done by whom, my friends? From Hindi to English, from Sanskrit to English, from Marathi to English. All these things was done by anthropologists, and anthropology itself is a translation. Also, there are a variety of, ideas that are put into action. If you recall, I have talked to you about action network theory, ANT theory by Bruno Latour. These are all part of translation studies. Now, when the English came to our system, what happened? They introduced administration, they introduced law, they introduced variety of, their, exploitative designs, including thought processes and ideology and whatnot. And slowly and systematically, they have destroyed what was called the original history of India, original culture of India, original psychology of India, and the books and the concepts which they were promoting were purely biased, and it was only developed to benefit them. Parallelly, there were some nationalists, who were working and trying to preserve their thought, the originality of Indian concepts, etc. But it is irony that even after independence, those concepts were distorted. And whatever history that we are currently learning is not the real history in reality. And all these things has been done by whom? Anthropologists, historians, and translators. I consider even historians as translators. I consider anthropologists as translators, sociologists as translators, and all those storytellers as translators. But this is what is the Indian context. On the other hand, in Europe, they had not had, the tradition, I will say oral tradition. I mean, they had, but very early stage, they developed the concept of writing, putting everything in records. So those things are recorded, it becomes easy to make a reference there. Although, for example, in Spain, there was a concept called kharjas, जो हम लोग बिरहा बोलते हैं यहाँ. Similarly, there were a variety of things. Melancholy, gypsy dance, gypsy song, जिसमें आप there are a variety of sad songs, sadness there. All these things are there in all human lives, including Arab world. But in Europe, they had this systematic, language development, quite documented. And even today, they have, some agency that controls the addition of vocabulary and deletion of vocabulary, etc. So in their concept, it is more to do with word-to-word translation at times, transferring from one language to another, transferring the message, not the concept, not the idea, but the message. So there, the brain is half cooked. But when the Rishi Munis were transferring knowledge from one generation to another generation, the brain cognitive load was very high, because you have to get into system, imbibe them, appropriate them, and then transfer it. So the originality of a scholar were very high in Indian context. But in European context, when we are talking about transferring, from one language to another, it was purely based on text. And you have to play more with text. Either you play with word to word or play with sense to sense, etc. So this story is running from variety of period. In modern times, we have just developed, when the concept of linguistics came, they started developing equivalence, 100% equivalence. And then slowly they said, no, not purely equivalence. We have to look into cultural nuisance also. They started thinking of local. They started introducing sociology. And most recently, they started also thinking about a persona of a translators. So these are all, the background of translation studies, translation as well as the scholarly activities that is going on parallelly in the world. But in modern times, the translation also has various dimensions, including technology, medicine, law, all disciplines that we think of, you will find translation playing a role. So the critical thinking, cultural relations, cross-cultural relations, scientific relations, spiritualism, all these are, the world that a translator has to look into, including, nationalism, supranationalism, and including regionalism, including power relations, international relations, and whatnot, ILO, PRIPS, everything, So, my friend, before this is the background in which we will be discussing today. So Prachi, our intern, is here with us, who will give you a presentation. Before presentation, she will introduce herself. And then our mentor and panelist and translation expert, Dr. Jagdish Sharma ji, will also assist us with more knowledge acquisition in translation studies field, because all these things that I have just talked to you was practically formalized, in certain selected universities only, and out of many universities like Hyderabad Central University, as well as IGNOU is one of the main centers where translation studies was finally introduced. So we have a lot more to learn from Jagdish ji, my friends. And before I come back to Prachi, I wanted to ask our friends who are watching us at YouTube channel, if you are not part of our Modlingua channel, do subscribe to the channel, because it feels good to see you active. And we are trying to create a kind of community learning platform, and especially language and translation and interpreting, is our main focus. The other appeal will be to kindly share this video in social media, so that as many people who are involved into languages or others can come and be part of this webinar, which is going to be very interesting today, my friends. So with this, I would like to invite Prachi to please take up and make it carry it forward. Thank you for your patience listening. Prachi, please. Prachi, are you there? Prachi, you have to unmute yourself first. Right. You unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, I can see you, and please. Prachi.
Yes. So,
Your voice is cutting. Perhaps there is some loss in internet.
So a very good evening to everyone. My name is Kukreja. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, now it is better. Prachi, please carry on. Prachi,
Yes. Can I speak?
I will yeah, introduce yourself and then I will start showing your PPT.
Yes, sir. So a very good evening to everyone. My name is Prachi Kukreja, and I am a summer intern at Modlingua 2020. I am currently pursuing my honors degree in the French language from the Department of Germanic and Romance Studies, University of Delhi.
So Prachi, I'm just sharing your PPT. Maybe you would like to make use of it, right?
Yes, sir. So today I'll be talking about role of translation studies in current times in India. So basically, translation studies can be defined as the study of theory, description, and localization of translation. So the people who are not aware of what actually localization means, it is the process of adapting one specific product or a service to a specific target market. I'll get into the details of localization later, but first I'll focus on translation studies. So the translation studies in India can be done from various universities, and I have divided the list into two parts. That is, one is and the second for diploma courses, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Banaras Hindu University, and University of Calcutta. For diploma courses, you can approach universities like University Ahmedabad, Bhagat Phul Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya Sonipat, Brihan Maharashtra College of Commerce, and Saga Institute of Management Studies. Now, when I am talking about
Prachi, there is some loss of internet, it
translation,
seems. Uh,
every translation is affecting communication around the world. Only communication is the only way diffuse. So here,
Prachi, 1 minute. There is some loss. It
yes,
seems there is some connectivity loss at your end. Can you check your internet connection? Meanwhile, I will talk to जगदीश sir. तब तक आप अपना कनेक्शन ठीक कीजिए. Okay.
Ji Ravi ji,
Jagdish
are you
sir.
getting me?
Yes. Now I'm getting. There is some perhaps connectivity loss. So
Yeah,
meanwhile,
yeah.
I just wanted to understand, how you see this translation studies developing in India, and IGNOU, and you might have interacted with other university and colleges where these things are taught. Would you like to share your experience, Jagdish sir?
Ravi ji, it is pleasant to be with you, and I extend
Pleasure,
very
sir.
hearty welcome to all our friends who have joined us. And of course, I am thankful to you and Prachi ji and Modlingua and Indian Translators Association. And I do appreciate such efforts are very much required. Not only that we would like to promote translation studies as such, but because translation studies as such in itself is such an important area that people should know about it. They have different notions about translation historically and culturally, and those notions needs to be clearly visibly understood. So I find it's a very, very important platform and initiative undertaken by you. So once again, my complimentations to you and your team.
Thank you, sir.
You have presented a very dynamic scenario of the Indian translation studies. It's an ancient form in medieval times scenario, and a lot of other aspects which are currently very, very pertinent. I would like to mention a couple of issues. You mentioned about the traditional knowledge, which used to be, transferred from one generation to another. And I think the world knows the tradition as Shruti Smriti Parampara. You listen and then you retain, and then you again pass it on to the next generation. So that was the tradition of knowledge transmission in the ancient India. But at the same time, there is a very popular saying that goes that translation is as old as a human civilization, perhaps much ancient or earlier than the written words or in the script when it was evolved. Because we know that we have a very important translation form which is known as nirvachan or interpreting. Perhaps we have been interpreting since the human civilization evolved, because we didn't have the script at the very beginning. So how do we, transpire? How do we, how did we, communicated with each other? So definitely there was a mechanism, there was an understanding, there was a system perhaps by which the intent or motives were transferred from one to the other person. So that was one thing. The next point which I would like to highlight about you mentioned very elaborately about the Indian tradition and the European tradition. What is the basic difference? How do we understand it? You see, the Indian tradition has a different objective of translation. Yeah, in contrast to European or the American tradition, where primarily knowledge transmission or the information transmission is the main objective, as you mentioned that either it is word to word or from sense to sense. That has not been the strictly tradition in India. So in India, the translation is one that it is day-to-day affair. You mentioned about that all of us are at least bilingual or trilingual, and many of us are even more efficient. They almost know 3 to 4 languages, especially people coming from northeast, from South India. They know a couple of languages from the region. Then when they come in contact with Hindi and English speaking areas, they also acquire those languages. So you see, this is something which is not from one language to other or A to B. But here it's a day-to-day affair. In fact, every child, every adult, every person in our household, in our workplace, we do translate. You see, so this is a very important scenario of our Indian society, Indian culture, and Indian linguistic horizon. So, as you mentioned that we are a we are multilingual country, we are multiculturalists, and when we are in such a situation, translation becomes an obvious, not choice, but a necessity. Another point which I would like to highlight about the Indian tradition of translation is that we have never confined ourselves to restrict the knowledge. We have allowed our sacred scriptures to be, critically examined. That's very important phase. And this critical examine itself in the terms of bhashya, tika, अन्वय, व्याख्या, arth, vritti. So all these are the ancient forms of the translation. Now we call bhashantar, anvad, anuvak, anuvachan. All these are words which we use in the present term, do not amply, represent the traditional forms of translation which existed from the ancient time in India. Another point which comes to my mind when I talk or we talk about the Indian tradition of translation is that we have been always thinking of the Lok Mangala. So translation is not for an individual or an restrictive, as I mentioned, or for a specific purpose, but translation means that we should think of good for all, for the entire humanity. So there is a very popular saying in Sanskrit that I am Paroveti Laghuchet Sam Dar Charitanam to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So that has been our tradition, that this is mine, this is yours. It's a narrow thinking. But the broader thinking, which is representative of the Indian tradition of knowledge system, is that the entire world is a village, is our family. So in translation, that has been the highlighting factor in the Indian translation. tradition.
So,
Would you
right,
like?
sir, I fully, understand and appreciate, especially about the critical thinking aspect, because in our tradition, we have always been allowed to question, even the
Yes.
God. And because of that, uh, rational thought process and variety of, critical thinking formulas have developed in our traditions. So with that, let me see, sir, if Prachi is ready. We'll
Yes,
tell her
please.
to initiate, and then we'll come back to you again, and
Sure,
we'll
sure.
discuss more on Prachi. To you, please.
Yes, sir. I apologize for the inconvenience.
No, no, it's okay. Please carry on.
It's a welcome.
Now looks
So,
better.
okay, sir. So last I was talking about the universities that offer the courses in India, the translation study courses in India. So when I talk about the curriculum of translation studies, so translation basically enables effective communication between the people around the world. So if you wish to diffuse a message to other people, communication is very much important. So translation acts as a courier for transmission of knowledge, a protector of cultural heritage and essential to the development of the global economy. So the main objective of this course is to learn how to analyze and defend a plurality of the typical examples or paradigms that enables greater understanding of the complex and interdisciplinary nature of translation. So the students here will gain increased awareness of many valuable ways of approaching the translation by examining how contemporary translation theories interweave with or differ from each other from cultural, historical, and social points of view. And the other objective of this course is that you get to learn about various methods, strategies, and theoretical translation principles as well. So the key units that you get to cover in this course are the key concepts of translation studies, metaphors, translation processes and uses, linguistic approaches, equivalence theories, functional theories, sociology of translation, translation competence, and professional versus non-professional translation, and much more. So when I talk about translation and its importance, it has been increasing at a very rapid race. So in modern times, I think it is completely and very much imperative, and honestly, no business or any community can survive without it. So if I talk about specifically businesses per se, so businesses per se, so if you have to grab attention of your customers, I believe it is imperative that you try to convince them in your native language so that they can get more associated with your services and your products and feel more comfortable in approaching towards your company. So outsourcing, I believe, is not possible globally. Outsourcing is not possible without translation. So the first point is that yes, it bridges the gap between communication between companies. The second most important point for the importance of translation is that the growth of multinational companies. So companies on the international level use translation so that they can share, receive, and communicate and deal across the borders. So if you have translation services incorporated with your company, outsourcing becomes very easy on a multinational level. Then we have cultural interchange. Now cultural art is acknowledged all over the world, and it definitely gives a rise to your local languages. For example, if you wish to show your music or your poetry or paintings for that matter, so with proper translation and synchronization of the subtitles for videos and films, you can actually portray your art on a global level by retaining the essence and the gist of your local language. So the national identity is kept in intact here. Then the fourth point is nation's external affairs. International diplomacy is very important for a country's functioning. So there are world leaders and diplomats who go countries to countries for the for presentations and talk in global summits and economic deals. So their translation becomes very important, so that people are not just nodding their heads in a yes, that yeah, they're understanding and they're trying to go away with it, but they get to know what you're actually trying to deliver to them. So here, in the matter of external affairs, the quality check on translation becomes really important, because obviously you do not want to put your relations with the other countries in jeopardy. Then the fifth point is accurate transfer of news. So there are many local languages in the world, like each country has their own local languages. So it might sound gibberish to those people who do not actually know about your languages. So correct information will not be delivered then, and we would not know what reality is actually taking place in the world. So news, in order for the news to be more effective and reliable, I believe it is important that translation is followed in that domain as well. Then we have boost in tourism. Now translated tourism helps in the people who are traveling to that country attract the tourists a lot, so they understand the places much better, and this gives a friendly and a very welcoming feeling. So the country becomes popular for its friendly tourist attraction, and this also leads to an increase in the tourist revenues of the country. So you have a double advantage here. Now I have come across terms such as globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation, and I've seen on the internet that many people use these terms interchangeably, but there's a subtle distinction that actually sets them apart. So researchers have actually created an acronym, GILT, which is GILT, so to refer to those activities that businesses engage in when they are trying to expand their wings to further beyond the national borders. So yes, so we all know that translation is basically conversion of a message from the source language to the target language, but I'll taking the rest of the three in detail. So globalization is, or you can also call it as going global, basically means the practices by which organizations become tightly connected with their customers and partners on a national level or on national markets. So to explain this, I have an example, maybe let's say of Netflix, that Netflix operates in more than 190 countries, customizing its content in their own local languages. Or let's for example, we have McDonald's having so many outlets in dozens of countries. So globalization can actually prove to be a boom to your to the world economy, and the globalization banner is set to include internationalization and localization. So internationalization, on the other hand, means it is a corporate strategy that makes the products or the services adaptable to enter different national markets and different tastes. Now, it is also called as I-18N. I and N both in lowercase and 18 in between, because the word or the term internationalization has 18 letters between it. So to explain this again, I'll take so yeah, and there's one more point. Definitely internationalization is reaching to different national markets, so it requires technical experts, subject matter experts, and people who have international experience. So for example, the McDonald's Corporation creates a menu which is adaptable to various different national markets. When I talk about localization, the process of actually adapting that specific product to a target market once internationalization has taken place. So if I put all the three contents together, globalization would mean 30,000 McD outlets operating in the world. Internationalization would mean uh, creating one adaptable menu which can be used in different national markets. And localization would mean making one meat-free restaurant, especially in India, because beef and pork are not eaten here, so that one specific chain is made in accordance with the Indian standards. So or maybe adding Mek Aloo Tikki or Mek Maharaja burgers to specifically only the Indian chains. So maintaining the global brand identity while tailoring your products and services in accordance with the with the local markets can actually lead to exemplification of localization. Now
So,
people generally,
Prachi, 1 minute, if you allow
yes,
me, I want to intervene here.
Yes, sir.
And add little bit of certain more clarification, it will become little more interesting also to
Yes, sir.
understand. You have so far explained in 2 points. One is the subject matters that we deal in translation, and you have then shifted to a concept called GILT and globalization and localization you have discussed. So in this context, I wanted to, add some points. For example, when we are talking about, what are the subjects or what are the domain that comes under translation studies, it is very important to understand. Then it will be, helping us, and will request Jagdish sir also to comment on that. As per my understanding goes, whatever I have studied at in 25 years or so, and slowly it has become part of it, because variety of people are using it. See, in translation studies, first thing which is very important is to understand the translation theories. In any discipline, whether you are into medicine, whether you are into law, whether you are into engineering, there is a theoretical dimension. And those theoretical dimensions make our mind more strong. They structure us, they orient us, they make us understand, basic fundamentals which can be used or crossed, with variety of other subject matters. For example, when we are talking about theories in translation theory, there are lots of good scholars whose name comes, including Cicero, the person in whose name the International Federation of Translators globally celebrates, Translators Day. Similarly, we have a concept called Babel, Tower of Babel, where the god wanted not to be threatened by people, and they changed the concept, and changed the mind of variety of people, and they gave them too many languages, so that they keep fighting, and they don't, they threaten their sovereignty, or power. वैसे ही जैसे in Indian context we have इंद्र भगवान की गद्दी को हिला देना, तपस्या करके या लड़ाई करके, someone. So those are certain theoretical, it comes from religion. So in reality, there was a time in ancient period, translation was purely based, or most of the time devoted to translating, ancient literature, especially in Western world, translating, Quran, or translating, Bible. And it was a very dangerous affair. If you translate God's message, if you attempt to do that, it was considered blasphemy. So you were risking your life, if you are translating anything religious text. Many times they were executed for attempting this. But slowly when time changed, they were allowed. But again, if you had done the wrong translation, there were the chances that you will be executed, killed, exiled, or forced to die. Even this has happened in medieval period, in France. Deolette, was executed for doing wrong interpretation as per that period of interpretation by the Turkish. Similarly, the Bismarck, or the industrial, in Europe, when he was trying to unite Germany. Similarly, when there were certain activities going on in Spain, when Spain was being united and they were fighting against Arab. Similarly, is Arab world, when they were translating, Quran, there were a variety of problems and they were killed. So it was purely religious thing. But when it evolved into little more better thing, the concept of, word to word came. Even in ancient time, word to word and sense to sense was discussed. Aristotle and Plato are the people who had done this, at a large. The idea was, if there is a sense there and you lose the sense by only making it word to word, there is no. Similarly, foreignization of text, the concept of domestication of text and or foundation of text had come to by Sly Maha. And slowly in modern times, translation is also, kind of concept called functional translation. काम हो रहा है, ठीक है. Now there is a concept called peer review translation. There is a concept of cloud translation, people translating. There is a concept called monolingual translation. You don't look into the original text. You just see the concept and you add your value and translation is done. Because, because of this global phenomena and international, this globalization boom of Google, the need is too high, on translators, that if there is something which has been produced in, let's say in English, it must go global instantly. So this demand to go global instantly, has created pressure on translation. And now there are enthusiasts, there are followers, there are, certain experts, domain experts, who just follow their instinct and, type and, they are coming back to that what we called, Rupantar, which was not available in Western world before. But now, without looking at the original text, they just understand the concept and do the Rupantar. Let's say something has been launched today, let's say a product has been launched today, and people who are, in, let's say in Bengal, want to know what it is. If they wait for the company to translate and, tell them these things, it becomes very tough. People cannot resist. There is a kind of quickness for everything, because Google and this geo boom and telephonic boom, they have made the human civilization restless. So in that restless situation, they cannot wait for a company to do proper translation, do proper proofreading, and do quality check, etc. They rather prefer to make it as quickly as possible. So many times they use Google and do editing. So this is what they call post-editing. These things are coming. Similarly, there is a concept called, translators are also treated as traitors, because they treat, they do not present the original language or message to new language in a, original form. Similarly, there are concepts whereby people, say that translators are invisible. There is a feminist theory where they say translators are generally treated as she, she is a translator, and writers are given more importance. Similarly, there is a theory that they say, translator rapes the text. There is a theory in which they say, translators are the people who are not only raping the text, they are also, doing kind of atrocities with the text. For the fact that whatever we in original language, whatever a person, myself, if I am speaking something now, after a few seconds, if I try and say the same thing, there is a loss of, information. At that phase of time, I might change my mind, Similarly, there are a variety of these concepts which are very interesting. There is a concept called deconstruction, you look at one point from variety of angles, from 10 angles, There is not always white and black. There is also a medium path, There is always also a third space. There is always, not right or wrong, but there is also a third space. There is a time, there is a space, and concept of a word, concept of linguistics, there is a dynamism. Nothing is equivalent. Today, something which is permanent for a word, after some time it can change its form. A concept that we are talking about, localization, that you have mentioned, McDonald's and all, if they start selling those products which they are selling in the US, perhaps it will not run well. So they go global first, it's called internationalization, and then they choose the best to suit the locale. And then they do experiment with the taste of the locality and then sell. Similarly, there was a concept when the internationalization concept came into picture, the Barbie doll, was has white face boy and white face girl. When it went to Africa, it lost the market. So they did research, and then they made black, boy and black girl. They changed the color of the Barbie girl. They changed the shape of the Barbie girl, look like more of a beautiful black boy, in color, and black girl in color, and then it made the big hit. Similarly, even when they are doing cinema dubbing, if they do not localize, in last session we have discussed, in the book translation done by Sharmila, Born to Die, how difficult it is, to present that Colombian life into, Asian context, Can you imagine the kind of problem and the situation that comes into picture? Similarly, there is a concept, that translation is a part of a system, which is called system theory. The way we have political system, economic system, social system, similarly, there is a translation system globally, and it has linkages with power. So those countries which are powerful, we tend to translate more into that particular language. And those countries which are, less powerful, we do not translate into that language. For example, if in America is a powerful country and English is its language, we tend to translate lots of American books into, less into, Indian book. We tend to translate Indian book into English, but we translate more of American books into Hindi. Similarly, we translate more of French book into Hindi or English, because there is also, a commissioner, agent, a sponsor. If you don't have a sponsor and all your theories are gone, if a sponsor tells you to translate certain text from this angle, you have to follow the person who is funding it. So these are all, variety of approaches to translation. And when we come to globalization, internationalization, localization, etc., there also the power, money, and variety of companies' policy come into picture. Similarly, there we have to play a role in developing terminology of variety of products. Especially, I recall when I was involved with Microsoft in their localization program way back in 2005, when first time the software in Hindi was introduced. At that time, if you look at the Microsoft, Windows, there was nothing, in Hindi, or there was nothing in Indian languages. But slowly they adapted. They adapted. First, the Unicode was introduced, and then they adapted, variety of new words were coined in Hindi for, window words. There were various experts. Similarly, in medical, in legal domain, in geographical domain, and a specialized domain, there are yet to the Hindi or Indian language vocabulary to be developed. So these are all, vast areas, I will say, where language and translation studies, play important role. Broadly, if we study law, you will find translation playing role there. And there is a paper, interpreting law and translation. Similarly, if you go to, medical science, there also there is a concept of, if you are into, a state, there is a language they have to study, and in that language there is a concept of translation involved. Similarly, if you study literature, if you study history, if you study anthropology, sociology, everywhere, this concept of translation comes into picture. In modern times, as Prachi has said, I will show you, there is one, clip that I had just, kind of kept it for you. There was I recall we had organized, a seminar at, I was part of a seminar at Punjab Technical University. They read this, अनुवादकों बिना कूटनीति नहीं. Without translators or interpreters, there is no diplomacy, right? So Fahian, Huensang, and ambassadors, when they come from another country, they are the cultural ambassadors, they are the communicators, and who communicates? Translators. Similarly, when there is a transfer of technology, who does the transfer? Translators. When there is a bilateral agreement, trilateral agreement, multilateral agreement signed, ASEAN is formed, SICA is formed, European Union is formed, 25 languages in European Union in the beginning, and there is a huge investment, billions of dollars are invested in translating. United Nations headquarters, ILO, American states organizations, all these international groupings, they have a big translation division. Similarly, in India also, every department has a translation division to communicate in Hindi, English, and Indian languages. So, and there are variety of job openings coming in translation studies, and where there you need to have a specialization, including options in Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of External Affairs, various departments, various states, central, as well as international organizations, private as well as government organizations. Everywhere you find these options coming in. So now the most important part that comes is how to be smart and take advantage of this translation studies that we do. We will come back again on that part. I will request Prachi. Before I request Prachi, I will also request Jagdish Sharma ji to throw some light on professional aspect of translation, if possible.
Ravi ji, you have presented a very critical view of the presentation and the present scenario, translators' role, the strategies of translation in different times and in different zones. I would just like to mention about a very celebrity and a very important historical translators which India has given to the world, the Kumar Jiva. Kumar Jiva was the one who took it upon himself to translate the Indian texts into Tibetans and the Chinese languages. And I think we should be proud of that. He is treated as a immortal hero in the Chinese tradition, entire literary translation tradition of China. That's one. Secondly, I think we have to be proud of our historical translation heritage that India has given to the world. The world literature will always be indebted to the translations of Indian epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, which have traveled through the Arab world to the Western world and become part of the world literature. And then you mentioned about the translations which happened, like Kalidasa's works, Abhigyan Shakuntalam, and then Srimad Bhagavad Gita's translation, and so forth. What I am trying to say is that we have a very rich and very emphatic tradition of translation that India has contributed to the world literature through translations. That's one. Second is that you see there has been different phases in the translation, or now you can call it translation studies. You see, you mentioned about that translation is a science. There is a view whether translation is science or it is an art or it is a craft. Most of us would agree, and most of the translation scholars agree that it is science because the way it approaches the source text, like Naida's approach, who is known for the Bible or biblical translation, American tradition of translation, and then it's an art being that you try to create a text which appeals to the target readers, and it's also a craft because a lot of creative thinking goes into making the target text not only readable but also loyal, at the same time readable, and also conforming to the socio-cultural values of the target text. So in that sense, there has been a tradition of linguistic translation tradition, but then it shifted to cultural turn. That was very important shift. And more recently, as you are mentioning about Google Translation, cloud translation, and other forms of translation which are happening today, now it is machine translation. So these are three major shifts from from the linguistic approach or the structural approach, rather we may call it, then it would be more appropriate, because Naida, Catford, Newmark, these are the propounder of the structural approach. And then comes like André Lefebvre, Lawrence Venuti, Susan Bestnet, and others who gave a new view to the translating process, that it is not only from word to word, but we also translate culture. And more recently, the more emphasis on the machine, because today what we want is we want a real thing in real time, and this is the constraint. So these are the shifts you mentioned about, and Prachi was also mentioning about the localization. You also made a brief reference to the views, to the translation techniques. A lot of strategies has evolved. If you look at the Susan Besnet's essay, and or Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak's essay, The Politics of Translation, I think it deals with the whole concept how the translators manipulate the text, and not only manipulate, but as you mentioned that sometimes the low languages do not get translated into higher languages, or there are other factors, who translates, why one translates, who sponsors. There are a lot of such issues which affect the translation. So translation is very near to the PAR center, or rather today one of the major area of translation studies is the translation in terms of power, how it creates the power sectors, power factions, and then ultimately it also helps in changing the power seat or the center of power. So translation, if you look at the translation in the colonial period, you see there was a very evident approach that was to translate the Indian text, but show them that they are not that way worthwhile or equivalent to the European literature. But if you look at the post-colonial translation approaches, now you mentioned about the visibility. So Lawrence Benotti talks about a lot about the visibility of the translator, and you talked about you mentioned briefly about the gender translation. So now the gender identity is becoming more and more visible. Rather, some people are refusing their text to be translated by the male translator. So that means translator is becoming more and more evident. That means translator has more responsibilities, and translator has to deal with the lot of other pressures also, of course, because translation doesn't happen in isolation. It always happens in a socio-cultural setting. It is not alien. It is not a creative work. It is a work which is in demand, which is required. Therefore, it is sometimes we call it the commissioning or the commissioned act. All the terms and conditions are outlined. If you look at the Katharina Ray's theory, the Scopus theory, then we know that this is an act with a purpose, and there are certain rules which the translators have to follow. That was one thing. Now I would like to come to the very important point. Today, the role or the utility of the translation has become much more important, crucial. I would just like to present few facts about the Corona period, how translation is required to be more active, more contributing to the factors. You see, the WHO has issued a glossary of Corona terms, and you will be surprised that it is available in 18 languages, out of which 4 are the Indian languages in which Corona glossary is available. Second thing is that the translation is found to be very very central to the support mechanism. You see, it needs the information is emanating 24/7, and there's a need to immediately pass it on to the stakeholders. So translations happening. It is integrating between the implies, or rather between the warriors, the clients, and the community. So translation is not an act in isolation, but it's act with the community participation, and it is integrating the community. So if you look at the new roles of the translation in the present, as Prachi is mentioning about creating the global economy, creating the global village, or implementing the WTO's program, implementing the globalization, implementing the globalized economy, translation is very, very crucial. So what I feel is that we have to see the changing trends in translation. You mentioned translators uh, are also called sometimes manipulators, but you see, it is always that who gets the translations done. I would just like to mention one brief, with a brief reference of the rather not medieval period, but the Mughal period. You see, Dara Shikoh was a very important translator. He got 57 Upanishads translated, besides a lot of other texts of the Hindu thinking. But some of the translators refused to translate the texts. So this is something which we have to keep in mind, that there is always more than one factor in the act of translation that goes into the translating process. That is one. And as we are addressing and interacting with the students or the friends who are interested in the translation studies, I would like to make a mention of the James S. Holmes. In 1973, for the first time, he gave a concept of translation studies in his elongated essay, Name and Nature of Translation Studies, where he called it a discipline. So, as a discipline, it got established when his article was published in 1977, and it was much later that Susan Besnet and André Lefebvre made a very substantive ground. Today, translation studies is becoming one of the major and thrust areas of studies, because it is the discipline which is interacting with different disciplines. If it doesn't happen to be there, then all the disciplines will be working in an alien and in independent directions. Whereas today we need to integrate the knowledge. We are an information society, we are knowledge society. So how do we become knowledge society? How do we become information age society if we are not integrated through the multiplicity of the disciplines? So there are a lot of
Sir Ispe, I just wanted to intervene if you allow me. There is on this particular thing, when you are talking about knowledge, I recall in 2005, Government of India has created a commission called Knowledge Commission.
Yeah, National Knowledge Commission.
Right, and in that National Knowledge Commission, the idea was to make India a knowledge hub. And part of it, there was a commission created called National Translation Mission. I recall Professor, who had, been very good to us as well as a friend, Dr. Udaynaran Singh. He was the person who was instrumental in launching this National Translation Mission. And the idea was to translate all Indian, text, which are very knowledge-oriented text, into different Indian languages. But before doing that, we were to empower human resources, train them, make them translators, professionals, and then those professional translators would do this and slowly, instill, pride in the Indian language and Indian own scientific temper through our own text instead of depending on the foreign text. So this kind of initiative has already been coming into India in order to empower our society through Indian, system of translation. And luckily, I have been a student of Susan Besnet at University of Ottawa, and interacted with, variety of people, including Anthony Pym, Lawrence Venuti, and Nidai School, etc. Luckily, I have been, lucky enough to be interacting with variety of people across the globe on these thoughts, including descriptive theory, hermeneutics of translation, and power theory, including Gayatri Spivak's feminism, when she calls Europeans to come to India and talk about, live with them, and then talk about women, than simply writing from third space and knowing nothing in reality. So with this, sir, let's move on back to Prachi and see what Prachi has more to offer. especially when she's talking about some more concept on internationalization, globalization, localization, and some more factors related to professional development of translators and some associations available. Let's see. Let's look at her, and then we'll come back again to Jagdish sir to understand your views on professional development after
Sure,
studies. Okay.
sure.
So Prachi, let's start.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, so I think I have covered globalization, internationalization, and localization, but still there is one aspect that I would like to highlight. So it is translation versus localization. Now there are times when people generally tend to mix the two terms, but translation is the conversion of message from source language to target language, whereas localization is the process of making the message resonate with specific target culture. So all I'm trying to say is localization is not at all only limited to translation. There are many challenges such as multiple cultural factors that one has to keep in mind while following localization. Example, language defies animation Arabic word. So when we see in English version, the character motions from left to right, but in the Arabic version, the character motions from right to left. So these are the basic cultural aspects that one has to keep in mind so that they can create a distinction between what localization is and what translation is. So to sum up, be it national markets or regional markets, one needs to plan internationalization and localization beforehand. This is because it would lead to customer satisfaction and customer retention as per their preferences and tastes. So together they form the GILT industry, GILT industry. Now, I would like to talk about the period that was 1976, which was really important for the translators profession. So this I would like to link this with the International Federation of Translators. This is also known as the Federación Internacional de Traductores, and it is an international grouping of associations, and it has more than 100 professional associations that are affiliated with it, representing more than 80,000 translators in 55 countries. So there was one document which is named as Recommendation for the Protection, Legal Protection and Social Status of Translations and Translators. And this was the first international document that was published by an international organization to throw some light specifically upon the profession of translators. So this was basically adopted by UNESCO on 22nd November 1976, and it was held at the General Conference in Nairobi. So this specific date marked as a milestone in the history of translating profession, and there are various objectives attached to the same that serve in the interest of the translators. I would like to highlight the top two or three. So the first one is to link and bring together existing associations of translation interpreters and terminologists, encourage and facilitate the formation of such associations in countries where they do not exist, or to provide members with information about the conditions of work, technological tools, initial and ongoing trainings, and queries that are related to that profession. Now, there are 3 regional centers that are present or are running in the current time. Those are FIT or IFT Europe, Latin America, and North America. A 4th center is set to be ongoing, and it is processing for Asia specifically. And it would also interest you to know that our mentor, Dr. Ravi Kumar, was the board member of the same federation from 2008 to 2011. When I talk about, I'm jumping on to the next topic. So it is Indian Translators Association. Now, this is an initiative which was taken specifically by the Indian people to grow this industry at a faster pace in India. So, talking about the Indian domain specifically, an Indian translators meet. This was the first translators meet that was organized by, again, our mentor, Dr. Ravi Kumar, to bring the translators all across India under one common forum or one common platform. So the emphasis of this meet was to discuss about the future of the Indian translators. And this also was considered as a hallmark towards the formation of the Indian Translators Association. It basically caters to the problems that are being faced by the Indian translators, how to address them, and also provide them methods for the better functioning. Dr. Ravi is also the president of the Indian Translators Association. So IT is integration with International Federation of Translators in collaboration with Termnet Austria definitely proves to be a vibrant platform for all the translators in India. So yes, now we know that the translation industry is growing day by day at such a faster pace, and definitely as Dr. Jagdish and Dr. Ravi Kumar mentioned, it is definitely affecting other businesses and other professions as well. So earlier, the traditional barriers that prevented the countries to expand overseas has now been broken only because of translation and translation studies. So now people are trying their hands and trying to globalize as much as possible. So this the translation industry has definitely proved to be a boom for and is opening new exciting possibilities in the emerging markets such as in China, in Brazil, and in Russia. Now I'll be talking about 5 specific sectors and industries uh, and how translation has affected the same. So when I talk about tourism industry, it is a very huge industry, and nowadays people generally prefer to travel abroad during their vacations and not travel in their home country. Or there are students who are willing to study in abroad, or people who are who wish to pursue for their job in abroad. So thanks to translation, it has broadened horizons and broadened opportunities for all those people and they can now actually explore the entire globe because of the translation services that are provided to them. Second is the oil and gas industry. This is one of the most leading industries in the world right now, and the biggest exporters of the same are US, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. Now there are green solutions that green energy solutions that are growing day by day. For all those who don't know, green energy solutions are the the basic powers that we have read in our school, that is solar power, wind power, and hydropower, etc. So if for supposedly India wishes to uh, import oil from Russia, people here are not much equipped with the knowledge and the way Russian language is spoken. So there comes the role of translators in helping India to import the oil from Russia. So this has basically helped India or the rest of the country to extend their hands on other countries as well. Medical tourism again is a very big business, and there are times when people cannot opt for the treatment in their home country, and hence they have to travel abroad. So thanks to translation, again they're less hesitant in conversing with their doctors for their treatments and knowing what is actually going around with their health. And when I talk about legal sector, again it has been increasing with a great amount of complexity. So the people and the clients are not only demanding for expertise in the national law, but they're also demanding expertise in the international law. So in order to study the international law, you definitely need the political background, the historical culture, and every background which is related to the legal sector. So to study that, again translation is needed, and this has led to an increase in the clients in the legal sector as well. The last one is political trends. The European Union, along with other multinational organizations such as the World Health Organization, the United Nations, we have NGOs and North Atlantic Treaty Organizations have translation requirements just within their own staff. So if such big organizations wish to interact with each and every isolated part for that matter, even they have to go to the isolated parts of the globe, they definitely need the staff, that specific staff, so that they can converse with the entire world and take the globe as one. So I would like to sum this topic by saying that if your businesses have the drive and imagination to succeed, then the world is surely an oyster to you. So to show how fast the translation industry is growing, I have a graphical representation for the same. Sir, could you please show the slide? Yes, thank you, sir. So, yes, sir. So as we can see in this is a graph that I took from the site known as Common Sense Advisory, and it is a very reliable source. So here they are studying the growth of the translation industry. So as we can see worldwide in 2016, the industry was approx $40.3 billion. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics suggests that the number of jobs in translation and interpretation services will increase by 29% from 2017 to 2024. The CSA, that is Common Sense Advisory, tells us that the industry will have a cumulative growth rate of 11.77% from 2017 to 2020. And by 2020, that is now, the industry is set to grow by $5 billion, that is to reach from 40 to $45 billion. So all I'm trying to portray here is that translation has seen a massive amount of growth in its industry, and it is growing day by day. So there are, when I talk about our country, India, in every country for that matter, there are some specific set of people who have been rigorously trying to promote the translation industry, be it the professors or translation companies or the ITA, as I mentioned before. So I would just like to portray one last thing, that is Dr. Ravi Kumar has written a book which is known as a role of translation in nation building. So while I was skimming through that book, there was that one aspect that really intrigued me the most. It said that imagine that this entire world is a garden of flowers. So for example, if you just have one type of flowers, say roses, jasmine, lilies, etc., it would give a very banal, a very monotonous and a very boring look. But if there are variety of flowers with vibrant colors, with different textures and different petal shapes and sizes, it will be more enchanting, more mesmerizing and picturesque. So the world is a beautiful place because of the distinction that is present there and uniqueness that is present there in the world. When I link the same with translation studies and the entire concept of translation, the globalized world, in the globalized world, the demand for translation has seen a massive increase in its industry. It is not only needed for creation of national identity, as I mentioned with the example of flowers, but it is also an essential tool for keeping pace with globalization and localization. And I would like to end my presentation by just saying last one thing, that is Dr. Ravi Kumar, as I've been an intern of this company for the past 2 months approx now. So I have seen how hard and how best he's trying to promote the industry, and it is quite evident that he has left no stone unturned. So I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on a global on this platform today. Thank you, sir.
Great to hear your words, Prachi. It is very satisfying that you have been able to portray translation industry in a very systematic way. This is what I was expecting that you will be doing. And I would like to thank you for making a very wonderful presentation, especially with data that is showing that there is a continuous growth in translation business. And we are lucky that, while doing all these processes, we have now very less costly, Wi-Fi and broadband. We have, variety of associations. Now we have variety of courses running in India, which was not available 25 years back. And we also have associations. We also have people joining hands. Otherwise, translators were considered, isolated individuals. Now there is a group, there is a teamwork that is going on. There are softwares that compels you to work in a team, develop glossary, terminology. There are new techniques that is coming in. As Jagdish sir said, machine translation tool, memory translation tool. And now there is new thing that is coming on that is called artificial intelligence. Google is predicting what you want to say, and there are a variety of other tools that is coming in. Innovation has taken place. So we are totally in a dynamic stage, and if we do not make use of this opportunity, I believe we will be the biggest fools. So as a linguist, as a person of, language, as a person of student of culture, being a multilingual, it becomes mandatory for us to understand the basics of translation, get into more details, go more deeper, do research, become scholars, and produce more, better human beings and articles and research in this area. So I would like to come back to our, mentor as well as panelist, Dr. Jagdish Sharma, to please make a concluding remark and share his, wisdom on Prachi's presentation and today's talk. Sir.
Thank you, Ravi, for inviting me once again to the forum. First of all, let me congratulate Prachi. She has an excellent data and very good presentation skill, and the way she presented the data and its explanatory notes is excellent. And definitely, translation is inroading into the market and becoming a necessity. That was one. And secondly, translation has multifarious roles. Actually, it is not just happening in one sector. While we look at the industry, it's working for the growth of the nation. It's working for the economy. It's working for the health sector. It is working for the knowledge society, and so forth. So it's a very, very emerging area. And just let me share with you that all our students who pass on from our courses from Indira Gandhi National Open University, they have always been in high demand and almost gets absorbed within their study period itself. So that means there is a lot of demand for the translators. Now let me come to the point which you are asking a bit earlier, that what are the hallmarks of a good translator? What should be the qualities? How do one becomes a good translator? So Raviji, from my experience and both as a professional translator as well as an academic in the translation studies, as a researcher in the translation studies, I would say that just knowing a pair of languages is not enough. The work of translator, as you mentioned, is very, very important. You see, translation can ruin the relations. Translation can build the relations. It can bring you to the new heights and can contribute significantly if it is done with the right perspective, right approach, right amount of knowledge. Therefore, it's a very sensitive profession. Let me just use the word sensitive. Sensitive in terms that because you were using the word adaptation. Now, if you look at the meaning from the plant side, from the botanical sense, then you take a plant and uproot it and then put it in the different environment, and then the plant gets adapted and it cherishes, it's nourished, then it becomes a healthy plant. That means it has fully adapted. Now, this is the same thing happens with the translator. Translator takes, as you mentioned, that it violates the source text, but after the violation, as George Steiner has put in, that it's use the aggression. But after the aggression, you also accommodate and you also appropriate it. It should not be dealt with the harsh hands. Now, you can violate, of course, you can use the aggression to the source text, but then you should be very sensitive uh, while carrying it to the target language, target culture, target society. You must be very clear about what you are doing. You see, what happens most often, I have seen the people who are consulting dictionaries only, and then they feel that yes, these are sufficient. Dictionary is a source of knowledge, but it has to be understood and it has to be applied. Then that application skill is to be an imperative skill with the translators. That one translator should know what are my tools and techniques. Right amount of technique is required, right amount of use of tools is required. So a good translator knows his tools and strategies and techniques. Another important quality that has to be with the translator is what you say is the adaptation with the modern technology. This is very important. Today, you see, working with hands and simply relying on the traditional method of translating is not sufficient. The world is changing. As I mentioned today, the real thing is needed in real time. You don't have time. Translators do not have time actually. See, I'm not talking about interpreters. They don't have time at all. It is simultaneous, but at the same time, it is also a phenomena which is fastly coming to the translators. Today, we get requests from many multinational companies, sir, please suggest a translator who can do this bit piece or maybe 100 pages, 200 pages in 24 hours, in 48 hours, in 2 days, 3 days. So that much of speed is required. So the translators have to be very adaptive with the modern technologies so that they make use of them. And the last quality that I would like the translators to have is a commitment. It's very important. If you are not committed, you see, you cannot progress, or the industry will not progress. Translation is a process due to which a lot of progress can be halted, and an extraordinary ordinary progress can be achieved if it is done in time. Therefore, the commitment is very important. I found with my experience now, I am sharing with a practical experience with you. When we send our students, our research scholars to these companies for interviews, so we get the feedback also. So they confidentially share how the candidates perform. What are the results? Sometimes they're very happy. Sometimes they say yes, they need more refinement in the language. They need more adaptation to the modern technology, and moreover, they need to be committed. They should be able to fulfill the commitments. If the commitments are not fulfilled, as Prachi is mentioning, the globalization, internationalization cannot function. You see, because the economic has a speed of its own. The tourism industry has its own requirement. It's a simultaneous act. It's act which is needed. Translation is not something which one does with his choice. Translation is done with the aspect that it is needed. It is always done for the people who do not know the original. Therefore, we have to. It's a service. It's very important service industry as well. It's required. So I would suggest that a translator, while should be very good at the language pair from and to which one is translating, but at the same time one must be very deeply aware about the culture, about the socio-cultural settings of the source language, as at the same time of the target language, and be a committed one, and also should know his tools and techniques well, and must have a commitment. And today, actually, this group translation is also becoming very popular. You see, there are, as you mentioned, that you're yourself heading an organization which is working in sync with the industry. So when there is a huge amount of work with you see, you need a good team of translators. Then, but the problem is that all translators are not tuned to work in team. Therefore, it is very important that the translators should be so tuned that they should be able to work independently at their own place and pace. But at the same time, they should also be able to collate and collaborate and work in team, because today we are not actually working in isolation. Today we are working in teams, in groups, and sharing information. So similarly, Translation Act is also becoming a collaborative act. With these words, I would like to say that Indian Translators Association and Ravi, you particularly doing a very immense job, and definitely it will help in progressing the translation studies to new horizons, and ultimately translation will achieve its objective, which is the social, educational, and developmental transformation of the nation, and from nation to of the entire world. What we call the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is our sentiment and our the underlining statement of the Indian culture. So I think that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam bhavna can be achieved if we are able to contribute as translators, as translator thinkers, as translator scholars in the right perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I highly appreciate that you have brought in one point which is very important. Apart from they are all important because they are more to do with academics, training, etc., etc. But above and all, most important is professional commitment. That is where our association comes into picture. We, as you know, as a translation translator, there is a translation training program offered by a variety of institutions, right? And there are enormous opportunities. I am interlocutor between academics as well as professional part because I'm a translator, I'm running a company, and I'm also a language activist and a translation activist, so that we do professional development. So at one point, academic aspect is well taken care of when you are studying. But when you integrate into the industry, at that phase of time, you have to do some tweaking to yourself. And in that tweaking, you have to integrate yourself with translation management. You have to understand the social media. You have to understand, dynamics of market. You have to understand how to enter into contract. You have to understand what is contract, terms and conditions, payment system, and commitment. If you fail to commit, you can run into a big mess of life. If you are sued, somebody gives you, a legal notice, and you can enter into a big soup, throughout your life. You will regret that you have come, why you broke that commitment. So if it has become habit, of your life to promise and break that promise, I suggest you to rethink, reorient about itself, because in business, a promise is a contract. And if you don't fulfill that promise, you can run into big troubles. So that is what is my take for today, my friends. But before we close, I want to come back to our viewers and see if they have any comments or if they want to share something. Let me read, so informative from Kirti Sharma, Dr. Rajesh Sharma. Mr. Silvame is saying that why you didn't mention Pondicherry University. It has MA program. Well taken note of it, sir. We have Preeti Bhatia saying there is evidence that interpretation existed during the Harappan civilization. Therefore, it can be concluded that translation also existed at that phase of time. I agree to this logic. So we have another, comment from it. There are other universities that offer diploma courses in translation. Yes, there are many. And we have Harvinder Negi saying, hi Jagdish sir, how are you doing? And we have Manas saying, saying request Prachi if once brief discuss GILT tech theory. GILT, she has already explained, Manas. GILT is globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation. These are 4 terms, and 4 terms have different meanings, but they are interlinked. If you want to know more about it, please Google or go to our website, modlingua.com. There are a variety of, articles written on these terms and conditions. Similarly, Jayanta Sharma is saying Darasiko translated the Ramayana also. Yes, I agree, sir. Sangeeta Bell, what are the major qualities one should have as a translator? Jagdish sir has already explained linguistic. I also explained non-linguistic. There are translation standards also into picture. If you go into our Modlingua's, channel, and try to explore, you will find I have explained project management in translation. I have also explained translation standards deployed in translation. I have also explained, how to kind of make use of these 10 quality standard, 7 quality standards that currently exist in the market. And we have also, if you recall, Modlingua, our company has developed its own rubric that is called Modlingua rubric to install, standard in translation, including we have included in that rubric how to become a faster translator or how to become a faster proofreader by using, certain tools, AI tools, including Grammarly. So if you look into that video, I'm sure it will help you. We have another comment coming from Prachi. She's saying it is enough to be bilingual or multilingual to do translation. Translators need to translate correctly. Yes, it is only being a bilingual or multilingual is not enough, certainly. You have to structure your mind theoretically, through process as well as through practical gyan under supervision. If you don't work under supervision in translation world, you will continue to do the same mistake, and after 10 years when somebody supervises you, you will come to know that in 10 years you have learned nothing. So translation under supervision is a must. Every time, even European standards, of translation tells you that once the translation is done, it must be proofread by equally qualified translator or by someone who is superior or a senior to you. So my friends, with this, today's, words, I would again come back and say thanks to our panelist, Prachi, who has done a very wonderful presentation, and a great thank to Professor Jagdish Sharma for being with us today. I am sure we will have more occasion to talk.
Raviji, just a small submission.
Please.
You have to translate to become a translator.
Right. And
the more you translate, the better you are at translation.
Yes. So it is not that, translators are not born. We make translator out of our own self by practicing.
Yes.
And, we will cover more of, professional aspect of translators, perhaps in a new webinar, because it is very important dimension for a translator. And it is not purely academic that matters. It is also the professional development, including how to talk to your client, how to handle your files, how to deliver things, as per the guidelines, etc., etc. Integrate with your peers, talk to them, develop networking, work in a team. These are all part of professional development of translators. We will cover up perhaps, in the next or maybe some another webinar. But meanwhile, I again thank Prachi as well as Jagdish sir for being with us, and it was a wonderful time. I hope our viewers who are watching us had liked this, and I request them again to do share. The more you share about these things, the better it is, because knowledge is always to be shared, not to be kept within yourself. With this, thank you again to you all, my friends, and thank you.